How the Day Breaks. Chapter 16. South Wind, North Wind. The evangelization of the western area had long been a dream of Helen Freeman, and after a previous exploratory journey, she and Lilias set off on January 5th, 1909. As the slow train rumbled for hours between low, tawny hills and dark bushes, they felt that somehow they were turning a corner in life. Now and again the hills widened into plains, where villages stood surrounded by emerald prickly pear hedges, all untouched as far as the distant Moroccan border. Lilias noticed that the day was Epiphany, the day star, the promise of the morning to come. Lilias wrote, arriving in Roselanane to the southwest, we found a half-built house almost at once, with a small workman's lodge adjoining it, where Helen could live temporarily and supervise the building. It was all settled within hours of our arrival, and when anything moves swiftly out here, you may know for certainty that God is in it. The last 3 days have been spent ransacking the meager shops for the necessities of life, together with setting up ingenious private arrangements of Helen's contriving with packing cases and petroleum drums. Tonight we sleep here for the first time and set up our banners in the name of the Lord. We visited her again in March. She found her peeling 3 potatoes for supper on the pages of the Spectator, and radiantly happy. As the months passed, doors opened, and Sarah Alamenos, the daughter of a Christian Spanish farmer, came as her full-time helper. Scores of small boys begged to come in and read, and Sarah, who knew Arabic, took command. Helen had gained an entrance to many homes, and just a year after her arrival she had the joy of leading Chira to Christ. Lilias was staying with Helen, and they went to visit the young wife of a well-known lawyer, at whose home Helen was always welcome. The girl, Chira, seemed eager to tell of a dream she had that had greatly impressed her. I saw 2 fire pots, she said. In one was very little fire, nearly going out, and in the other a bright, strong fire. Someone stood by and said, "Do you know what these 2 fires mean?" I said, "No," and he told me. The little fire is going out, and is the religion of Islam. They pray and fast and give alms, and they say, if it is God's will, we shall get to heaven. But the bright fire is the new religion of Jesus, and you must leave the old fire and come to the new. God sent that dream, said Lilias. He has spoken to you. Yes, she answered. I believed before, but now I know. I told the others about it this morning. Someone said it was nonsense. Some said it was true. Yes, it is true, answered Lilias. The religion of Islam is a very little fire, because there is very little love in it. And in the day of judgment it will go out. But the good news about Jesus lights a great fire in our hearts, because it tells of his love that led him to suffer and die. If you leave the old fire and come to the new, it will burn in your hearts too. And everything you do or suffer or say for Jesus will be another piece of charcoal to make the fire burn brighter. She nodded. Yes, that's the meaning. I am one of you now, and sister to all the others in the world. Do they have dreams too? Sometimes. Some do if they can't read. He speaks to them direct as he spoke to you. By the following autumn, Helen's house was far too small, and Lilias and Blanche went down to help her find a larger one and leave Alex Gayral, a new young worker, as a permanent companion. On all sides, not least in the soul of C. Maloud, Chira's husband. He had far advanced tuberculosis and probably knew that he was dying. He listened wistfully, and then he too had his dream, and wrote an account of it for Helen. I was sad with sickness on the night of October 10th, when I became aware of 3 men standing by me in white tunics. One was tall, and 2 were short. "Who are you?" I asked. The tall one replied, "I am the Christ." I began to weep and lament that he would heal me of my sickness, and he answered, "I cannot heal you now, but later I will deliver you from torment." Then he showed me a little garden and said, "Work this garden and eat of the fruit and of the truth. You are my disciple." Then I awoke from my dream and found no one. He was much impressed. He felt that the little garden was the short lifespan left to him to work and to witness for Christ, and he grew spiritually with a strange swiftness. He asked for baptism and gave away tracts and gospels to all who visited him. The group marveled until Alice McElroy from Scotland traced the clue. She heard of a young fellow back in Edinburgh with a spine injury, who month after month had lain flat on his back and prayed for aloud. But the time was short, for Maloud became desperately ill, and the French pastor visited him daily to read and pray with him. When the end was very near, he sent for Helen. "You pray with me," he whispered, and within a few minutes he passed into the presence of the Lord. But the encouragements of the Realizane did nothing to assuage Lilias's thirst for expansion. On the anniversary of Helen's arrival, she went to visit her, and her spirit was stirred as she looked out of the train window. She wrote, "Oh, that great tract of country beyond the Milana mountains, stretching away to the sea and sinking into the foothills, the pink spurs broken by the prickly pear hedges surrounding the villages. I tried to count them, for that strange burning longing generally denotes some way of the Lord behind it, though one hardly sees how they could be reached, distant as they are from any European centre. Yet very shortly after, Blanche purchased a small house in Milana, the northwest and pioneered outpost. As usual, when God's time came, they found the very place they wanted on the edge of the native part of town. An open valley with white houses leading down and down to the river. Milano was a marabout center, a stronghold of Islam, standing on a shoulder of mountain 2,700 feet above sea level. It was a center for festivals round a well-known shrine, and it was not an easy place in which to live and witness for Christ. Negotiations for the cottage took a long time, and it was about 10 months before Blanche left Mabel Gratoff and Mary Watling in possession. Back in Algiers, they were still enlarging their borders. Lilias had seen the need for a quiet house where newcomers could study, and side by side with this plan has woken the longing to bring out regular groups of girls of leisure as short service workers. It has come with that sense of kindling and burning that so often marks the turning of a corner in God's road. All the night with a pillar of fire still holds good. The house that Lilias had her eye on was up for sale, but other offers had been made. There were days of prayer and waiting, and then they were told that the house was theirs. It was large and airy, and the girls named it Shushan, the palace, although its official name was the House of Dawn. Only a few weeks later, they formally bought and opened another small house in the city, Biet's Nama, the Room of Grace, for Alice McElroy and Miriam Madsen had sufficient Arabic to start children's classes and visiting in the area. There were other bright hopes, too. Lilias and a friend, Miss Erickson, from another mission, had visited El Kef on the far eastern border adjoining Tunisia and had found a welcome. We traveled in a toddling train across the moors of heather and Aleppo pines, broken by gullies pink with oleander bushes, till a fretted gray cliff came into sight and grew into the town we had longed over with such a strange longing. We stayed at a frowsy inn where hens and dogs wander in and out promiscuously, and were soon out in the streets. Boys greeted us respectfully. They recognized Miss Erickson from a previous visit. The children seized our hands and drew us into their homes. We went into a shop where a sweet-faced old man was reading, and we offered him a tract. In a few moments the door was crowded with outstretched hands, and other visits followed. We traveled back by cart with a horse who had never been harnessed before, and who was tied to the shafts with such length of tether that he could turn round and look at us when he was so inclined. I forgot how many times he got his leg stuck over the pole during the journey. Yes, it would be possible to gain a permanent foothold in El Kef, and other possibilities were opening up. The young workers were coming on well, and there seemed nothing to hold them back. Even a van had been bought, in answer to an advertisement. Helen had insisted on it, and it was bright red and had belonged to a lion tamer, but it was just right for their needs, and it carried the girls to further and further horizons. Come, thou north wind, breathe, thou south wind, breathe upon my garden, that the spices may flow out. Why had that verse come to Lilias with such an insistence just about this time? She thought about it. The north wind tears down the dead wood and holds back the buds that are opening prematurely. They are getting ready by repression for strong life when the south wind blows. During their spring conference, Sister Eva from Poland spoke on the same verse. We need the north wind to bring about the readiness for spring, and the clearing blast has done its business. The south wind will blow. There are souls in whom we have waited anxiously for buds, and instead there has been a sudden snap. This is the north wind work. Were they forging ahead too fast? We don't know, but for months following these glad new beginnings were a series of checks and disappointments. It started with Alma Krebs contracting typhus and being admitted to the hospital desperately ill. Annie Whistler, who had nursed her in the early stages of the illness, exhausted by anxiety and sleepless nights, was sent off by a French doctor for 6 months' complete rest, which closed the work at Biet's Nama. Within a week, Sasha Perkins and Mabel Grautoff were summoned back to England, owing to illness in their families, and this shut down the work at Milana. By this time, a full-blown typhus epidemic was raging in Algiers. Edel Jensen decided to go back to Denmark, and Miriam Madsen was invalided home and died 3 months later. Lilias wrote, "When will the north wind have done its work? And when will the south wind rise from its land of eternal summer? Is it waiting for a wider vacuum?" One can well imagine the problems the medical team were facing dealing with the epidemic in airless alleys where every man's home was his castle, jealously guarded from foreign eyes. One grocer told to send his child to isolation hospital, hid her until the counter of his shop, and sent another child in her place. The little girl under the counter recovered, but amongst those who died was the young chieftain who had come to them in their travels south, and who they believe had opened his heart to the Lord. Lilias grieved, but found comfort. When we remember the gentle earnestness with which he listened and assented, we cannot but hope that he too, all the love of Christ, shall learn at his feet in paradise. It may be that he would have turned back in the path on earth, and when he found that it led to Calvary. All work was closed temporarily, and the crowd of boys who came so regularly and listened so well had to be disbanded when Laurent Olives was taken ill. And the most troublesome of his carpentry class was allowed to visit him. The boy took flowers, carefully arranged, but threw them away at the door. "They are not good enough," he muttered, and stood gazing sorrowfully at Laurent. The end came quite quickly. Lilias was summoned to his room, where he lay almost unconscious, except when the name of Jesus seemed to bring a slight rallying. "Jesus, vive Jesus," were his last words. It was the first break of the band through death, and about this time there came another break that was almost as hard to bear. Other missions were coming into being, the French Baptists and the American Methodists, led by Bishop Hartzell, with bigger organizations and more financial stability. And the Villains and the Olives decided to join these two societies respectively. Had been the first couple to follow up Lilias's pioneer expeditions in the South, and Pierre and his wife had already settled in an outpost at Oued-Seif, which would now have to be closed. May Olives had been the first young helper to settle and stay, and she had been like a daughter to Lilias. But at least the Olives would stay in Bilda. The diaries say very little about it, only one short comment attached to the bare facts. If they can, as they think, do more solid work than others under a different mission, then we must try to not hold them. To us, however, in its personal aspect, and as regards to our own bit of the field, it is another north wind blast. Lilias saw in all these things the devil's counterblow to blessing and expansion, and she was not dismayed. It seems as though once again the fresh tide of prayer that God has given us has only served to waken all the powers of darkness against us. But I think that it is often the way. They too feel the shock of battle that has been awakened in the heavenly places by our cry down here. The first answer to the Lord's Prayer for Peter, that his faith should not fail, was the utter breakdown of his faith at the first test. But it was just a step on the road to full Pentecost. She never lost the certainty of the vision that a great day of Pentecost would one day dawn in the Muslim world. But faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Their urgent task was to carry that word to its farthest limits of the land. Chapter 17. Away in the Desert. And then for a time the south wind blew softly. The girls, apart from Edel and Miriam, came back, strong and rested and eager to take up work again. The American Methodists were seeking to establish mission stations in the large towns, And the years 1911 and 1912 were years of expansion. A couple of short service girls came to help restart the work in the House of Dawn, and they were the happy forerunners of many others, some of whom became permanent members of the mission. Their young strength and cheerfulness acted like a tonic on the older, depleted generation, and Lilias rejoiced in them. We came down to supper tonight and found the whole group in native costume, made from their curtains and bed covers in their rooms, with their tablecloths draped around their heads. They looked fantastic, and we had many warnings and private misgivings as to whether their coming would mean more labor than burden lifted, but all these fears melted within less a week from their arrival. Elise Thorpe has managed the secular side as well as that there has never been a care in that direction. We wonder what we shall do when all their dear merry helpfulness ends for this season. Elise Thorpe and Mary Freeman became full members of the Algiers Mission Band, and until the war years stopped them, they were never short of short service members. Kathleen Butler in England became the short service deputation secretary, for the mission had developed and expanded in many ways. In 1911, the new Home Council held its first meeting in London, followed by the first council in Algiers, and first sending out of the printed quarterly magazine to which all were free to subscribe. The field council was followed by a rally for all the workers, and the teaching crystallized round the following question in 1 Corinthians 9:1. Am I not an apostle? The life of conscious vocation. Am I not free? The life of detachment. Have I not seen Christ? The life of vision. Are you not my work in the Lord? The life of service. Another glad new beginning was the first native conference held in May 1912. 2 came from the North African mission station at Cherchell, and 3 Kabbalat lads with their 2 evangelists joined the little band from Algiers, men and women on either side of the curtain. It was joyful and yet sad, for so many of their dear early converts had either fallen away or died, and even Sherifa had ultimately been overcome and was kept at home by her Muslim husband. But Bilad, Mustafa, and Omar were there from the olden days, and a few more had joined them. Another Omar, who had come to Christ simply through reading the story of the cross, and Hawawatch, who remarked, "The kitchen is full of darkness, but all the shadows have gone from my heart." Hanifa was there, who had said, "I want to know the world is very empty. I want the other life." Lane, who had quite scared Lilias by insisting that he was stronger than Satan, but then he pulled out a small card from his pocket and held it aloft. On it was written, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Fatima was there too, who had prayed, "O Lord, I have nearly died from the darkness. I open to you all the doors and windows." Some would stay and some would draw back, but on that day they were all joyfully united. There was another glad opening just then. Lilias wrote, "God opens and no man shuts," is the promise God gave us long ago for those beloved Southlands. Now, just as the Villans are leaving Oued Siouf, a door has swung open farther afield, just over the Tunisian border. Years ago we visited a town of Tozer, and felt God's Spirit working there, and Miss Cox of the North African Mission has been there 3 times since. She writes now there is a possible native house vacant in that very town, and she asks if we are disposed to occupy it. We have replied with a joyful yes. Tozeur was a big town with few European residents. It lies on the edge of the salt swamps and is 30 feet below sea level. A beautiful oasis of palms, apricot, pomegranate, and fig trees. But Lilias and Blanche remembered the grave men who used to gather round all day and take gospels, to study at night, and the women, indigo robed and silver decked, bringing handfuls of eggs and oranges. Most of all, they remembered the sorrow of leaving. The house at Tozeur was an old inn, roomy and suitable. It was rented and named Dar Ignor, the House of Light. In the following spring, Alma and her friend, a trained nurse, out for the summer, moved in. A year later, Lilias and Blanche visited them. As the train wound south, they feasted their eyes on meadow and mountain carpeted with creamy jonquils, the flame-colored marigolds, and their thoughts flew back to the sad partings 10 years previously. It was wonderful to leave the main line and face due south once more, to go down with a mission house of our own, with settled work begun, and the first fruits for Christ already gathered, goes into the realm of miracle. At least, it would have looked like that in days gone by, and yet it all lay there in God's next time. And how glad the hearts of the Father must have been over his secret when he saw us in past years, sadly turning our backs on Tozeur and leaving it to its darkness. They took the new desert train at 3 a.m. Sunrise came with a great scarab wings of dusky red behind the purple mountains and madder rose hills. Then came the climax. The hills closed round us, and we plunged into a deep canyon, winding between lowering cliffs, fluted and castellated, until at last, through a rift in the valley, gleamed a sunny line of the desert. An hour more, and the long line of dark peacock green lay along the maize-colored sand, and grew into a feathery line of palms with their brown villages alongside. They got a tremendous welcome from Alma Krebs and Mabel Gratoff, and the crowd of excited boys all wishing to shake hands at once. A quiet night in the house with its whitewashed walls and palm wood ceilings, and it was Sunday, and all the little boys were arriving again, bright-eyed creatures, who repeated texts and hymns as through the years of Sundays lay behind them instead of weeks. This was followed by the Sunday morning meeting, with the first brother in Christ sitting beside them on his mat. Then came a group of older lads to read. It all seemed like a dream. They visited nearby Nephta in a conveyance like a shovel with no seats, and were wonderfully led to the very man who had once begged them to come, and who offered them to use the use of the shop, where men gathered all day to listen and discuss. The ladies stayed for 3 days and then left, recognizing those first well-known signs of restlessness and opposition. They traveled home in the shovel. The air like hot wine, and the desert like a great silent seashore, with the tide far outbarred to the horizon in deep, ultramarine, palest yellow as sand water. Light and shadow alternated. As we neared Tozeur, the eastern hills took on their evening amethyst with sapphire shadow, like the walls of New Jerusalem let down. There were 3 full happy days at Tozer, seeing endless visitors and talking over the immediate future. NEFTA seemed wide open, and a permanent shop offered, but no man had volunteered for this work. They laid plans for a second house for women and girls, and a book depot and reading room facing the street. Surely God would send a man soon. They took a day off and walked to the source of the springs, where the water welled up through the sand. Lilias wrote, "Such a slow, quiet welling. Only when we lift our eyes to the miles of palm forest can we measure the extent of that small fountain of life. So we stand here at Tozier, at another source of the springs. The first drops of the river of the water of life are beginning to flow through this dry and thirsty land, and although it is but a trickle as yet, with no sign of an oasis line, yet faith sees it afar off, and for everything shall live where the river cometh."